What's up everyone? Welcome back to another exciting Art of War video. Today we are in part 1 of the Astra Militarum Masterclass. If you're excited about the Astra Militarum, the Imperial Guard, the Defenders of Humanity, this is the video for you. Or should I say the video series. This is part 1 of a 5-part series where I talk everything you need to know about playing with Astra Militarum and how to master them on the tabletop. So if you're a guard aficionado, thinking about starting a guard army, or maybe just want to know a little bit more about them, well, sit down and enjoy. We'll be putting out a new video every other weekday. So this one is going live on Monday, but that means you can check back in on Wednesday, Friday, and then the next week, and you'll be able to catch parts 2 through 5 as well, wherever you're watching this. If you're watching this, well, and you want to finish the rest of the series, you can get every single part in the Art of War War Room. That's going to be on our website, thewarroom.vhx.tv, or by becoming a gold member of YouTube. But if you're a silver member, you'll be able to access parts 2 and 3 as well. Now, let's go ahead and dive into Astra Militarum. In part 1, we're going to focus on the playstyle. All right, what is the overall playstyle for Guard? How does it win? This is probably not a huge surprise. Astra Militarum is primarily a shooting army. They are trying to get range superiority, and they are trying to abuse that to support their mid-board elements. They are not just an army that sits in their deployment zone and shoots. Astra Militarum armies that play that way generally are not successful. Instead, they are mostly trying to fight for, to protect their deployment zone, to gain control over the mid-board, and shoot you the whole time. They're trying to get range superiority through their various methods. They happen to be an army that is very good at indirect fire, and they're trying to use that to control most of the board and use that to just score more points than you. And if you run into the guns, you'll get tabled. That's the overall playstyle. So they want some units that can push the center. Those units that can push the center usually are contributing buffs, additional damage, or both to help out the shooting backfield. They're also trying to occupy space and take up the board and tie things up so that they don't make it to the shooting backfield. The shooting backfield of Guard, it does not want to be interacted with. It wants to interact with you. It does not want you to interact with it. Astra Militarum definitely have the best indirect fire backfield in the game. They have a lot more units with indirect fire than any other codex, and they frankly have the best indirect fire. So in a standoff war where they're shooting you and you're not shooting back, Astra Militarum will benefit. That's probably not a huge surprise. If they shoot you and you don't shoot them, they're happy. So Astra Militarum generally wants to play a 5-turn game. It is certainly possible for Astra Militarum to benefit from a short game where they are pushing you and you are getting tabled. But in general, Guard likes playing a longer game, because if they get to keep activating damage dealers, and there are some turns where you're not damaging the Guard army, they are probably winning that war of attrition. Speaking of, that overall playstyle does focus on attrition warfare. Very thematic for the Guard, quite frankly. The Guard army is trying to feed units into the middle of the board and wear you down. They're trying to push things up in trade while bringing back the units and still continuing to pressure mid-board. Basically, Guard wants to put units in the mid-board to score points and hold objectives and contest objectives, and force you to do the same thing, and basically say, you're going to run out of units in the mid-board before I run out of units in the mid-board. If you sell out your whole army for the mid-board, then some of my units are actually going to ride behind you, and I'm going to control more space than you are, and the guns are going to keep thundering. And by the end of the game, you have been worn down, where you're either not fighting them for the midfield effectively, and they're scoring more points there than you are, or they have gotten into your backfield and are now taking you off of even more objectives if it has gone well for them, and now you're just scoring nothing while Guard dominates the late game, having effectively tabled you. That's what Guard are looking for. They're not looking for a turn 1, too bad I captured enemy outpost. That's not really real. They're not looking to rush you down and immediately tag your entire army in combat. It's also not real. They're trying to shoot you, score points, and then shoot you even more if you try to fight back. And by using their mid-board elements to draw you out, also do damage, support the damage dealers, well, they can do that quite effectively. So let's now talk about the strengths of Astra Militarum that contributes to this playstyle. They have strong indirect fire. They can credibly kill a targeted enemy unit, or they can damage several enemies. It's not necessarily a split fire, each Manticore picks off a Rhino kind of situation, but if there is one thing that the guard player would like to kill, they can usually kill it. There are some things tough enough to tank this, but most standard data sheets, if you've got 5 Space Marines, 10 Guardsmen, a generically durable but not incredibly durable vehicle, just like a Gladiator, any of those profiles, guard can indirect, point at, kill. Doesn't happen 100% of the time, but it'll happen fairly often. Or they can just spread out their fire and damage several things depending on what buffs they have and what's going on. They're good at destroying scoring units, and they're really good at returning destroyed scoring units. One of the best things that guard can do is spend command points to recycle their regiment units. I'll explain the keyword system a little bit more later, but certain guard units are eligible for other stratagems based on their keywords, and one of the best ones is returning a destroyed unit with the reinforcements stratagem. So if the guard player can continue to play the game, spend their command points, lose some guys, bring them back, lose them, bring them back, and they're shooting you the whole time, and if you're just trading units back and forth and on the center objectives, and the whole time there is indirect firing, and the destroyed guard units are going into reserves, well, there's going to be a point where there are still 3 or 4 guard units in the midboard, and you are running out of units, and now the guard player is scoring more points than you. They are contesting your primary, they're driving into your deployment zone. That is a very big strength for Astra Militarum. The reinforcement stratagem is playing a large part in their current competitive success. Astra Militarum always can pressure an enemy with their guns. One of the strengths of indirect fire is that it sometimes forces people to be more aggressive. If an army is vulnerable to the Astra Militarum indirect and they can't just sit there and take it, they do have to step into the middle to play the game. If guard puts cheap infantry on objectives and starts shooting indirect, if you don't come forward, you are still getting shot and they are scoring points. Now you have to come forward, so Astra Militarum can apply a lot of pressure and force the enemy's hand. Again, what Astra Militarum wants to do the most is make a plan, execute the plan, not have to change the plan midboard, just crush the enemy behind math and a well-executed game plan. They would love to say, hey, I have infantry on the objectives, I am shooting you with my guns. If you step forward to fight me, the infantry you kill will come back, and then I will have even more guns to shoot you because now you're in line of sight. And so they're trying to either you stay back, get outscored and shot by indirect, or you push up into the teeth of the guard army, and while you're in front of the guard army, you start to run out of models as they shell you into oblivion. The final really unique strength here is orders. Orders is a very unique faction rule. Of course, we only have one detachment, but theoretically orders will carry over to other detachments when that comes. And it's where you can just buff key units in the command phase. As long as you have maintained your order ranges and you have officers available, you can give your most important units in a given turn some very crucial buffs. You know, one of the best things is you can just pre-measure and say, yep, my guns are going to receive accuracy buffs in my command phase. Well, that's what I want. I want my guns to be more accurate. This is awesome. Or my contesting pieces will have higher OC, or they'll be faster. My direct line of shooting will be faster. My limited combat units will be faster. Or my combat unit that's going in anyways is going to be a little tougher. It's going to have a higher save. You have multiple options for giving a key buff to a unit in the command phase. And a lot of guards, list design at the moment is built around making sure you have those orders, because those orders are generally worth it. You do have to pay to buff your units. They're not free. You have to take an officer, but it's usually worth doing. Now, let's talk about the weaknesses of Astra Militarum. They have a lot of strengths. They do have a lot of weaknesses as well. Some of these limitations are ones you have to be aware of and work around. Some of them are ones that you can remove with careful play. The first main limitation, in my opinion, is that single guard activations can be inconsistent. It is relatively rare to give a guard unit full rerolls to hit. Really not that many things do it. Now, one of the things that does, like the Manticore, is something you will often take. But almost every guard unit is tied to an amount of inconsistency because they lack innate rerolls on the shot count and the hit roll. A Manticore can have full rerolls to hit, but it's just a d6 plus 1 shot weapon with blast, which means sometimes you shoot at a Rhino and it's 2 shots. And then the fact that you have made the hit roll reliable, but you just have less shots than normal means it's unreliable. Sometimes a Manticore one taps a Rhino in one activation. Usually I find that's the third Manticore, because the first 2 get the Rhino down to 3 wounds, and then the third Manticore does 15 damage to it. It's like, excellent. But that means that single guard activations are not consistent. You're trusting on weight of activations to smooth out the numbers. Sometimes you fire a Kazakin unit and neither of your melted guns wound because they're wounding a T9 vehicle on 4s, and hey, just even if you hit on 2s, sometimes 2 shots hitting on 2s, wounding on 4s without rerolls just doesn't get a wound for that. It's a thing. Sometimes a melted mine rolls a 1. Okay, what's your answer to that? Try another melted mine, right? If one Manticore rolls bad, doesn't do enough damage. You can try to make your Manticore more reliable, but at a certain point it's not worth chasing CP into a single activation. It's worth, well, I guess I'm just going to keep activating. Guard absolutely does damage by committee. Now they have good damage units. It's not like each thing is doing barely any damage, you need 5 units, but you generally want to have multiple guard units trying to accomplish a job in order to make sure it gets done. And if you can leave a backup target for the backup units, that's great. With indirect, this is easy. If the first Manticore is the one that rolls high shot count and nukes a Rhino, well, the other 2 Manticores can now do something else. But you have to be mentally prepared. It might take 3 Manticores to kill this Rhino. It might take this X or Y. You have to be prepared that one guard activation is very rarely just going to do the job. If you take an expensive enough tank, that's a direct line of fire thing, something like a tank commander or a demolisher or a rogue thorn. Some guard activations, the ones that cost more, can be more likely to do it, but still a demolisher cannon is always going to miss if it rolls a 2. It is still a random shot count. Sometimes you roll low on the shot count, you roll a couple 2s to hit, a couple 1s and 2s to wound, and there just was not a buff you could apply that would make that better. And you just have to move on. That's just, it is what it is. So, be prepared for that. One guard activation, inconsistent. Several guard activations, consistent. And that's kind of the way the army plays. The guard damage does add up if you apply it in numbers of activations, but one activation is so rarely doing the job. It is actually, there are very few activations with Astra Militarum that I completely trust to kill 5 scouts in cover. Just one activation, can I kill 5 scouts in cover? I don't trust any of the indirect pieces to do that. I don't trust any of the infantry to do it. I'll trust like a 6-man bullgren in combat and a demolisher with every gun in range. Anything else is I need to have a backup plan. And sometimes I don't need it. There's a lot of things that can kill 5 scouts in cover. A Manticore can, a Kazakin squad can, but I'm not going to just say, oh, this will always happen. Next, command point generation is very important. Not only is preserving your command point, usage, and making sure that you're generating units like Lord Solar stay alive, it's how you spend it that's really important. I have, both playing with and against Astra Militarum in tournaments, I have found that if guard can keep a handle on their CP, for the whole game it can feel oppressive. Because, man, there's always enough CP to bring back the Kazakin unit. They always have a spare CP for a grenade. They're using fields of fire. But if the guard army runs behind, suddenly it's, I only have 2 CP left. I have to use this to bring back the Kazakin. Now I can't reroll anything if I want to do that again next turn. I can't do this, I can't do that. And sometimes they run behind. And I think this is one that is solved with practice and, just preserving Leontis and then knowing your army. But it is very easy to get frustrated by, just dice rolls early and say, oh, well, I'm going to reroll this 1 on the shot count for a Manticore. And all right, I'm going to throw an extra grenade here. And sometimes you realize, wait a minute, 1 CP wasn't a break point of could I bring back a unit or not, but I did it twice, and now that is just an extra unit. And sometimes you just have to commit to the bit with Astra Militarum and say, I'm not going to CP roll it, I'm just going to keep shooting units at you until the dice work. At some point it'll happen. And yes, if your opponent never fails saves, the only advice I have is give them more saves. Just keep handing them saves and hope that they fail at some point. And so this is something where knowing the pace of guard and knowing the pace of command point expenditure with guard can be very important to maintain the game plan. As well, maintaining buffs is very important. It is very easy for a guard datasheet to drop off if unsupported. If you just read a guard datasheet, don't look at the stratagems, don't look at the army rule, you don't look at the orders or anything like that. Most guard datasheets are not particularly impressive. However, realistically, a demolisher is not just a ballistic skill 4 guy with no rerolls at AP 3. He is often +1 AP, often +1 ballistic skill, often rerolling 1s to hit. you can add more to them, and so maintaining those buffs is important. As long as you keep your orders alive, you keep your CP, in an orderly fashion, and you are pre-measuring, you can keep your units very efficient. Just be careful when the wheels come off of a guard army, they come off. When the guard army is on the back foot, their tanks are backing up, losing the heavy penalty, losing lethal hits, and then they have a bad turn and then they get tagged, the game can just end. And so you want to be careful to avoid that situation. Maintaining buffs and maintaining order, within your own lines is actually quite important. Finally, I already just kind of hinted at it, the army is vulnerable to combat. Guard does not have fallback and act. The only way to fall back and act in Astra Militarum is like the Cadian Castellan and the Rough Rider data sheet, I think. There are not many. They are not competitively seen very often because they're generally not very good. What you're looking at for fall back and shoot is I'm going to fall back and my friend is going to shoot you, right? If a tank falls back, the tank is not shooting, which means that if a tank gets tagged, you are losing. You are either staying in combat and still shooting, or you are just losing an activation. So guard very much need to keep the opponent off of them. Guard is all about maintenance and momentum. When the guard army is keeping you in front of them, keeping you getting shot, they are screening out, so you keep tagging infantry and chimeras, but you're never tagging Russ and basilisks and manticores, and they keep thundering the main guns while cycling around different scoring units in the midfield. Those things sometimes get tagged, they can fall back and throw a grenade, they can stay in combat with a chimera and keep you tied up and shoot with some flamers or something. Then there's play all the way down. You can't tag everything, and the back line is always activating. That's a great place for guard to be in. But if they can break through and tag you, there is a loss condition. Now you can outplay the loss condition, you can be aware of it, you can protect yourself from it, but being aware of it is the first step. All right, let's now talk about the different competitive archetypes for Astra Militarum. Now, compared to some other master classes I've done, this is an index. There is one detachment. Every guard army uses this detachment. So diversity in guard maybe does not look quite the same as it does in Space Marines or Tyranids or Necrons, if we're being honest here. But how you play it and the units you choose is where the diversity comes in. Almost all guard lists follow the same themes. There are units that are primarily shooting. These are often vehicles. There are units that are scoring units that contribute other roles, but that are primarily outside of your deployment zone. Basically, units are designed to operate in your deployment zone and out of your deployment zone. Those are the two types of units. And what you use for those units is very different. Because guard units often want to hold still for maximum damage, units that are dedicated damage sometimes are just holding still in your deployment zone. Sometimes you have to push manticores for mission play in the late game. Sometimes manticores hold still for 5 turns and they always get lethal hits and heavy and they just are shooting. That's okay too. There's not necessarily a wrong answer there. But what you're looking to do the most is have some units that can push upfield. The ways that you do that are very different. We'll talk about these in archetypes. Sometimes you're trying to score midfield objectives by pushing transports of catachans. Sometimes you're trying to scout Kazakins. Sometimes you're trying to scout Kazakins in chimeras or Toroxes. Sometimes it's Bulgrin. Sometimes it's Ogrin. Sometimes it's Leman Rush Demolishers that can shoot down into combat and so therefore are not as prone to being tagged as normal. Sometimes it's I'm actually pushing past the objective and so I'm now willing to drive a Rogel Dorn on. Even though the Rogel Dorn sucks if it gets tagged, well, I'm going to push everything past it so that you can't tag it. Sometimes it's Scions that go back into reserves when they destroy it and keep deep striking into weird corners. There are also Gaunt Ghosts and Rattlings and Sentinels. There are a lot of different units that can fill the role of I am pushing up out of my deployment zone, I'm contributing some amount of damage or buffs to the army while I push, and I am willing to get close to things. Because something in the guard army has to get close to the enemy. There is not a guard army currently available that can table the opponent without getting somewhat interacted with back. You would have to roll very well into a very bad army for that reality to exist. Someone's got to go play and protect the boys at home. And then the other element is the boys at home. It's the indirect castle. It's the officers that are doing the buffing, which sometimes that's, Manticores, sometimes it's basilisks, sometimes it's medusas carriages, sometimes it's earthshaker carriages, sometimes it's long range tanks, sometimes it's armored sentinels. That there are many options for both of these, but each guard list is going to be a mix of units designed to leave the deployment zone to harass, score, still do damage, buff, whatever, and score points while they're doing these jobs. And there are units that are designed to sit your deployment zone, protect your primary objective, and stop the enemy from getting into your deployment zone, and do damage while they're waiting. And the ratio is everything. So, archetype number 1, artillery spam. This is the one that was the most popular at the beginning of the edition, but I think after some points changes, I think this is the weakest one. Dear coordinate point, just to whom it may concern, I'm just going to shoot you from behind a wall. The artillery spam is taking more than average indirect fire and hoping to table the enemy in time to score points. If you invest more points in artillery than a normal list, well then you're spending less points on something. Maybe your midfield push units are worse, sometimes you have less of them, sometimes you have no direct fire guns. This playstyle just brings less stuff and is trying to table you. Now, I think that this playstyle can fall apart very quickly if it doesn't work. If you take more points in I'm going to shoot you from behind a wall, and then you realize that you still can't shoot them to death, maybe because they're made out of lone ops, maybe because they're actually just that tough, maybe, I don't know. There's so many different things. Sometimes you have a feel no pain, you're -1 to hit, you're -1 to wound, you have a good armor save, you have a good invuln, and sometimes you just have Bellicor making the entire army unshootable out of 18 inches. If it cannot shoot you to death with indirect, it falls apart. This is very much a list creation type of army where how it does is determined in list creation in the matchup. This can be very viable in teams where you can find something that can be shot to death with artillery and then you shoot it to death with artillery. That'll work, but that is not always going to work. And I think with the modern Astra Militarum, this is not an archetype that is seen as often as it was maybe at the beginning of the edition. Next up is a more mechanized infantry build. This is where you're taking more transports, more high OC models inside the transports, and you are constantly trying to push the center with units that aren't necessarily good. There's just more of them. It is genuinely difficult to kill a transport and the guys inside in 10th edition. You can do it, a lot of people can do it, but it requires a lot of effort. And so cheap transports full of dudes pushing up with some more direct line of sight guns behind them is very much if you deal with the buckets of dudes, just buff guardsmen jumping out of transports with flamers, killing your cheap trash and being higher OC than your tough stuff, and then a little bit of indirect shoots, and as soon as you come out to party, there are direct fire guns dealing with you. That can be very, very good. You can overwhelm the enemy and move block them. You can just have so much stuff that they don't get there. You are still recycling infantry so that you're constantly pushing models in the center, and behind it you have plenty of guns activating. Again, the difference in the competitive archetypes is more so the execution and the type of unit that you're using, more so than it is what is the game plan. It's not a vastly different game plan. It's some things are going in the center to occupy the board, some things are trying to do damage while you're occupying the center. Are you trying to take more stuff in the center to score points and less stuff to table them, or more stuff to table them, less stuff to score points in the hope that you table them in time to score points? What's the ratio? That's the archetype. Finally, the perfectly balanced approach. Guard, good stuff. This is the style that I would say is mostly what we see in the competitive meta right now for Astra Militarum. We can see that this is somewhat what I've been playing on stream myself. This is the archetype that I think is being played very successfully by several big name players at the moment. David Gaylord has been on a tear with Astra Militarum. Some of the good players like Nassim from Team England have also done well with Astra Militarum lately. This is, you're taking some indirect, some direct fire. You are taking the good stuff. This is taking the good guard units. You're taking the officers who are necessary to make it work. You're taking the most efficient tanks, the most efficient artillery, and the most efficient bodies in a ratio of a little bit of everything so that you can choose what's getting sent forward. Do I want to send forward Bulgrin or Katachan or Kazarkin for this particular opponent? Which one wants to go first? Okay, that's the one I'll send first because I've got a little bit of it all. I've got a cheap Sentinel to put out and recycle, or a Kazarkin squad to recycle, or a Bulgrin squad to tank and still score because my opponent can't deal with Bulgrin. I've got a little bit of everything. You're maintaining board control. You're trying to use each piece where it is best served. And if you've got a lot of reps, you can make it happen. Now, let's talk about why you should play Astra Militarum, and specifically what you need to do to play it effectively. Astra Militarum is absolutely a consistency army. The biggest problem with Guard is that it can be inconsistent, which means if you, the player, can make it consistent, you are solving their biggest weakness. That's important. If you can constantly get the Manticore activations by protecting them and making sure that they can activate the whole game, there's nothing you as a player can do to make your Manticores roll well. You can give them Ignore Indirect, you can give them Heavy, you can give them +1 ballistic skill, you can give them +1 AP, you can do all of that. As a player, there is nothing you can do if your Manticore rolls ones on the shot count the whole time. You are trusting that the more times you fire the Manticores, the more results that are not ones you will roll. That's it, that's the plan. And so getting that consistency is about patience, it's about practice, it's about knowing your game plan going in and understanding matchups. If you play Guard into a matchup you're maybe less familiar with, you can get crushed if you don't realize what's happening, because if your game plan goes off the rails, it can go off the rails. But Guard is an army to master, in my opinion, not an army to quickly pick up. I have not actually seen, despite it being an army that could do this in prior editions, specifically End of Ninth, I have not seen Guard so far be an army that someone just picks up and plays 2 games with and says, oh, this is easy, done. It's not that easy because it's so punishing if it fails. Guard lack hyperdynamic play. They don't move any units 24 inches. They don't fall back, act, do everything with flying units, but they are reliable in numbers and they're difficult to stop when they're executing its plan. Astra Militarum is very much an army where you roll into the game with a plan, you try to execute the plan, and you keep your opponent underwater. You're not trying to react to their brilliant plan or their own brilliant plan and trade back 5 different battle rounds. You're trying to do your thing, hold your opponent's head underwater while you shoot them. And you can't get to my backfield. I am screening you out. I am contesting your objectives. I am shooting your things that are contesting my objectives and killing them. I'm bringing my units back. You're running out of units, I'm not. We're equal on points, it's getting lower, it's getting lower, it's getting lower. Now you don't have enough to contest me, now I'm up on points. Guard is very much a game plan, execution, and a efficiency army. As always though, pre-measuring, target priority, resource allocation, both physical units and command points, all of this are very crucial, as well as planning. You really want to stay on top of things. You want to know your plan for next turn during this turn. You do not want to be figuring out your plan for this turn after your opponent has done everything. You want to have units set up and positioned to do their job. You can't just keep a unit behind a wall and just say, I'll figure out where it's going when I need it. You've got to know in advance. You've got to plan in advance. Guard is very much that kind of army. And that is Astra Militarum. As I said before, this was part 1 of the Astra Militarum Masterclass. There is more coming your way soon. So if you want to catch more Astra Militarum goodness, that means that part 2 of Astra Militarum Masterclass is going to be live on Wednesday. So maybe by the time you're watching this, it's already live. But either way, go forth and enjoy it. Part 2 and 3 can be found on the War Room or on YouTube as a member of our Silver or Gold platforms, while Part 4 and 5 will be available on the War Room again, which you can, if you're watching this on YouTube, find a link in the description below, or a Gold member can access Part 4 and 5 as well. So the website or Gold member can access all 5 parts of the Astra Militarum Masterclass. Thank you so much for watching this, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you hop in the Art of War Discord if you have any questions, any comments, any thoughts. I'm always happy to talk about the Astra Militarum, and you can absolutely tag me in the Discord, and I'm happy to respond and talk about my favorite armies. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.